All right, good morning, Howard. We're getting ready to finish our last half of the first half of chapter 7. We are at Roman numeral number 4, the success of the Constitution. After much, so capital letter A, ratifying the Constitution. The Constitution was signed by the delegates on September 17th of 1787. However, 3 people there would not sign it because it did not have a Bill of Rights, which obviously I'm sure you know by now, what you know of American culture, that the Bill of Rights is probably what we would consider one of the most important parts of our Constitution because it dealt directly with the rights of the individual citizens, whereas the Constitution prior to the Bill of Rights basically established our government, designated its powers, and also designated its limitations. That had to deal with the federal government, and the people wanted to know that they had rights that would be protected from the government overstepping its bounds. So, George Mason, Edmund Randolph, and Elbridge Gerry refused to sign without a Bill of Rights. For those delegates who favored the Constitution, they took on the name of Federalist, and this is going to be the beginning of what we know as political parties. They favored federal rights, and then you're going to have those who did not favor the Constitution, and they were known as Anti-Federalists, and we'll get to those in just a second. So the Federalists were led by, not surprisingly, James Madison, who was the father of the Constitution, John Jay, and then Alexander Hamilton, all of who supported a strong central government. And in order to promote the Constitution, because what had to happen is then once it was signed, copies of the Constitution were then sent out to the 4 corners of the 13 states, and it was given to the people to decide in each state whether or not they would be ratified. So in order to allay any concerns or answer any questions, James Madison, John Jay, and Alexander Hamilton wrote a series of essays that were printed in local newspapers called the Federalist Papers. And the purpose of these Federalist Papers was to encourage that the states would accept the Constitution. And in each of the essays, they would refute the objections that people had about giving a power to a strong central government. Number 4, those who opposed the Constitution were called Anti-Federalists. They believed that the Constitution gave too much power to the national government, and they still believed that states' governments should be above federal government. So these are the states that we would term, as we get in past the Constitution, you're going to have those, again, who still believe in a strong central government, and then those who believe in states' rights. Many of the southern states are going to be in this party because, again, the one elephant in the room is slavery. Everybody, the Holy Spirit is pricking, I believe, many consciences at this moment, that there's a whole race of people being enslaved by Americans who just won their freedom from a tyrant of their own, and these people need to be freed. But if we pushed the envelope, they feared that if we went too far and took slavery away, we would never unify the country. And so there were those who believed that we needed to unify the country, and that just by the passage of time, slavery would eventually burn out. However, in my previous chapters of teaching this class, I brought out that the Southern lifestyle was very much modeled after the European lifestyle of the life of the aristocratic family, with the large plantation. In England or in Europe, it would be the large castles or manors, being staffed by many servants. And so their lifestyle was required many hands. And then also the way they made their money required many hands. It was an agricultural based society, and in order to meet the supply and demand of their raw materials, of whether it's rice, tobacco, eventually cotton, they needed to have as many hands to bring in the harvest, to plant, and to care, and they just were not willing. The Bible tells us that no man can serve two masters. He will either love the one and hate the other. And then it goes on further, and it says, it calls God and mammon in that passage, and mammon is money, and that's very, very true. You can't love money and love God at the same time. You have to put money in its proper place. And had these people had a proper, truly been having the Bible and God in a proper place in their life, I believe that slavery would have burned out. It would have been gotten rid of, because no Christian will want to enslave another person wanting after they have been liberated from their own sin. Learning about God and loving God, you have appreciation for all of his creation, no matter how they appear. So anyway, so the Anti-Federalists are going to be, a lot of them are going to come from the southern and western states where slavery still is held to. 9 of the 13 states were needed to ratify the Constitution. And as you know, Delaware was the first to sign on December 7th of 1787. This is where you have Caesar Rodney. If you go down to Wilmington and you go to Rodney Square, it's named after Caesar Rodney. Caesar Rodney used to have a statue at Rodney Square. It's since been removed since the summer and all of the unrest, but it doesn't change the fact that he is the one who brought the Constitution to Delaware for it to be the first state to be signed, and hence our state motto of being the first state. The 9th state was New Hampshire, and they signed it a little over 6 months later on June 21st of 1788. And the other states held out because they wanted the Bill of Rights to be added. Number 6, the elections. Now that the Constitution had been ratified and this new government had been established, we had to elect to put people in the House of Representatives and the Senate. And so the elections for the new republic were held a year later in 1789. In this, the Constitution had set up the Electoral College. Now, the Electoral College in the last few, probably since the elections of 2000, which you were not here for, but we had a very contested election in 2000, just like we had this year, in which the Electoral College chose George W. Bush, but the popular vote chose Al Gore. And so for many years, even in 2016, when Donald Trump won over Hillary Clinton, he won the Electoral College, she won the popular vote. And there has been a huge call to dismantle the Electoral College. But our founding fathers had a reason for establishing the Electoral College, and that was to make sure that the right person got into office. And they understood that popularity is like emotion, and it can ebb and flow. And people can get all excited about a very charismatic person who makes a lot of promises, but is very unqualified for the position. So the check and balance that we had in our election was that we had the Electoral College, and it was a governing body, and for each state they were given the number of votes of how many representatives they have in Congress. So for Delaware, we have 3 electoral votes, 1 for each senator and 1 for our representative in the House. And based on the vote of those people in the Electoral College, they would cast votes, and then they would take those votes to Congress and certify who should be president, which obviously we know happened on January 6th, because that was a very important process in this year's election. And for the first election, everyone unanimously voted in George Washington. Of course, we did not have a popular vote at this point. It was done through the Electoral College, but the electors did go to their people to find out who they wanted. And of course, everybody wanted George Washington, because even at the end of the Revolutionary War, people had wanted George Washington to take over. They actually wanted to kind of set him up as king, so to speak, but he wisely declined the position. But he did accept the nomination and the election of being the first president of the United States. And underneath the Bill of Rights were the first 10 amendments. And remember, amendments means changes. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution. And we know them very well because this is where we have the right to free press, right to assembly, right to freedom of religion, right to bear arms, and so on. We'll discuss them more in detail once we get into the second half of this chapter. But these were rights enumerated that specifically deal with the citizen itself. And the Bill of Rights went into effect in December 15th of 1791, so after Washington was inaugurated as president. The reasons for the Constitution's success: number one, the U.S. Constitution is the longest established constitution in the world. Okay, it's over 225 years old. There is no other document like it in the world, even though many other countries have tried to copy our Constitution. Our Constitution is the oldest, and it has gone without change. If you look at the history of the other countries of the world, typically they have changed their constitution to model the power that has taken over that country. Those countries have been rocked with insurrection and revolution, and their constitutions have been rewritten time and again. But our Constitution has not. Even though many people have pushed for it, thankfully, the wiser heads have prevailed, and they have not touched this document. I will say this, that if there ever comes a time when our government is willing to change the Constitution, I would recommend everyone be very, very afraid, because it's it is a living it's considered a living document, in that it still applies to our times. The concerns it addresses translates into whatever culture America is living at that time. And just like impeaching presidents, I do not agree with impeaching presidents. It sets a very bad precedent. And because it takes away from the sanctity of the office. And again, it becomes a power tool. I think that in the last 4 years, I believe that the Democrats have set a very bad precedent. I thought the same thing when they wanted to impeach Bill Clinton for lying about his extramarital affairs. And I think that, now it will, there's going to be a huge temptation for revenge from the Republican Party. Prayerfully, there will be enough men of God in those parties that will again allow wisdom to prevail and not allow this rocky time to undermine our government and our country. But who's to know? Satan whispers in many ears. So, but the U.S. Constitution has remained unchanged. We have had 27 amendments, which in 225 years, over 225 years, That's very little changing.